Hi, it's Fleur here from Little Desert Quilts. Welcome to my Geeks class. And today's class we are looking at wedges and stripes. Now I've got a few quilts behind me here. One of them is made with stripes, one of them is not. One of them is sort of the technique we're going to be using today, one of them is not, and it's the other way around. That's a bit confusing, isn't it? Have a look at the one at the top here first. This one here, this one is made with stripes. This is one fabric, and it's made with stripes. Now, if you want to see how to make this particular style of quilt, you can access the archive library and look at my class from the previous gigs, because I did a class on stripes and making something like this. It's very simple. You just cut squares and then we, counter cut it. But I'm not going to tell you about that now because that's in the last class. What I want to talk about today is using stripes to make a quilt more like this. Now, I know this one's not made with stripes, but the technique is basically the same. So to make this quilt that I'm going to talk about today, we're going to be using a wedge. Now, there's lots of different types of wedges. There are 10-degree wedges and 9-degree wedges and 22.5-degree wedges and all sorts of different sizes. But the one that we want to use is a 60-degree wedge. Now, I've got a few wedges here to show you today. Some of them are the ones we don't want and some of them are the ones we do want. So first of all, I'm going to start with the ones we don't want. So I've got a whole stack here. So I've just been through my rulers box and picked out, some wedges. So these ones here are all 45-degree wedges. So this angle at the top here is 45. Now this is an Alaska ruler. It has a 90-degree at this end, but this end is 45. We don't want to use the 45. This one is a spiderweb ruler. Again, it has a 45. Now some of them actually have 45 written on them. Some of them don't. So you're not sure. But if I put one against the other, then I can see that these are the same. There's a 45-degree, what they call a kaleidoscope ruler. And then this one is also a 45-degree in a different brand. We don't want the 45-degree ruler. Let me emphasize that. What we want to use is a 60-degree wedge, or you may know it as a 60-degree triangle. 60-degree triangle. Now, there are many different types of rulers that will have a 60-degree. This one is a kite, but this angle is 60. And to be sure, at 60, if I put it up against the 45, it is a different angle. You can see that. See that's a different angle. So you will end up with a different result if you use the wrong ruler. So we've got lots of triangles here in various sizes. All sorts of different size 60-degree triangles all the way down to a wee little one. And they also come bigger than this. 60-degree triangle, 8-inch in a different brand, the Creative Grid. So the Creative Grid's rulers have grip built into the back of them. The kite one that I showed you has 60-degree. Also, a 60-degree diamond gives you the right angle. So there's a little one, there's a big one. So there's many, many rulers available with a 60-degree angle on it. And that's the one you want. Now, the one I'm going to use today is my little 4.5-inch one with the tip cut off. Now, I want to talk about tip cut off or tip on. So what we call a ruler with a tip, the ruler with a tip cut off. See the difference? You see that? One's got a point and one's had the point cut off. This one also has the point cut off. It doesn't matter which one you use. What matters is that you use the same ruler for the entire project, that you don't swap between using one with a tip cut off and then go, oh, well, actually, no, I want to use this one with the tip on. Because if you use two different rulers, one with a tip on and one with a tip off during the same project, you will find that you've got triangles of a different size. Even though you've cut them from the same width strip, they're going to be different size by 1/4 inch and they won't fit together. So that's why you need to use the same ruler for the entire project. Like I said, it doesn't matter whether you use the tip off ruler or the tip on ruler. What matters is you use the same one for the entire project. So today I'm going to use the tip off ruler. Now I'm going to move all these rulers out of the way and then I'll be back. Okay, so let's have a look at some fabric. We're going to have a look at some stripes fabric. And I have got stacks of stripes here in the shop. So if you want to have a look at what stripes I've got, you go to my Little Desert Quilts Facebook page and you look in the Spot Stripes and Checks album. There are literally hundreds of them. But let's have a look at what stripes are. We're going to start with some black and whites because it's pretty easy to see that this is a regular black and white stripe. When I say regular or even is another word that I can use. The black stripe and the white stripe are the same width. They are straight, so it's an even stripe. This is also an even stripe, but these are wider. The stripes are wider. And then I also have this one, which is wider again. Whoops, no, not that one. That's not the one I want. This one. That one's something else. So this one here. Regular stripes, the white stripe, the black stripe are the same width as each other. So this is what we call a regular stripe. We just have them in 3 different widths. There. Now, the one that I showed you accidentally is this one here. Now this one, see how the stripes are a little bit wavy because they're not straight. The edges are a little bit wavy, so this is a little bit irregular or a slightly crooked stripe. It's still a stripe and it would still work for the technique that we're going to do today. But it's not a straight stripe. This is also a black and white stripe. That's black, white and grey. It's what we call an irregular stripe because there is different widths in the stripes. Some of the stripes are really narrow, some of them are wider. So this is an irregular stripe. And I'm showing you black and whites to start with just so you can see the difference. So this is an irregular stripe. This one is a regular stripe because everything is the same width. See how they're different? And then I did show you one that was slightly crooked. Now I want to show you something else, just so that you understand. When we're talking about stripes, we want them to go either parallel or perpendicular to the selvage. I'm going to show you something else. This is stripy, but it's not a stripe. It's black and white. It's stripy, but it is not a stripe. For the purposes of the technique that we're going to use, this will not work very well because the stripes are going in all different directions. Fantastic fabric, but it is not what we call a stripe. It's a stripy fabric, but it's not a stripe. Here's another one. As an example of a stripy fabric that is not a stripe, because the stripe is not going either parallel or perpendicular to the selvage. It's going at an angle and it is not regular at all. So they are stripy but not stripes. I'm going to show you a few more examples. Now we're looking at some colour. This one has every stripe the same width, so it would be a regular stripe, all the same width. And then this one is irregular because we have some differences in the width of the strip. So stripes can look quite different. Most stripes will run parallel to the selvage. So the selvage is the bit on the bottom that usually has the printing on it, and the stripe is running parallel. Some fabrics will have the stripe running perpendicular going this way, but not very many. Most of them run parallel to the selvage. There are some other things that will look like stripes and will work for this process, and that may be chevrons. So a chevron essentially is a stripe with a bend in it, but it will also work because now this one is running perpendicular, so it's running across the fabric. So for our purposes, this would still be classed as a stripe. Then there's also things like border prints. Now this is a border print, but essentially it's a stripe. It's just got a little bit more going on in each of the bands of the stripe. But for our technique that we're using, this would still work as a stripe. Now the other type of stripe that I do want to show you is the diagonal stripe. So see how it is printed on the diagonal on the fabric. So this is an example of a diagonal stripe. Here's another diagonal stripe. And then here's the red version of that one as well. So the stripe is actually printed on the diagonal. Now, if you use this type of fabric for the technique that I'm going to show you, you'll get a whole different look again. And we're not exploring that in this particular video. We might leave that for another time. But diagonal stripes will give you a different result. And there is one more example here of a stripe. Now, this one is quite a wide stripe. It's not, it's a little bit wavy and there's a lot going on. I guess you would call this like a border stripe fabric, because it is certainly lots of busy stuff happening. And then there are almost stripes. I'm just checking that I have showed you everything that I've got sitting here. Almost stripes. And the almost stripes are actually what I'm going to use today. So this is what I call an almost stripe. It's very stripy. The stripes are running parallel to the selvage, but they're not actually defined stripes. It's just a stripy fabric, but the stripes are running in the same direction for the entire fabric. So this is the fabric that I've chosen to use to show you today how to do the technique. The other thing that I've done is I've chosen this fabric in 3 different colorways. I only have 3 different colorways, otherwise I'll probably be using more. So there's the 2 different blues and there's the orangey one as well. So same design, just different colorways. Just different colorways of the same fabric. And these are the 3 fabrics that I'm going to use today to do this technique, to show you how this all works. So I did a bit of a practice and cut some of these fabrics, and then worked out that the way I was cutting them was going to be very wasteful with fabric. So I then had to go back and do my maths and work out what I needed to make a quilt. And I worked out that with 1 metre of each fabric, so 1 metre of each fabric, I can cut this without having the waste that I was doing originally when I first tried it. So I'm going to grab 1 metre of the orange, and then I'm going to show you how to do the cutting. Be back in a second. Okay, so we're back with my 1 metre of orange, and I've turned the camera down so that you can see what I'm doing. So I've got my 1 metre and I've got the selvage down this side here. I'm going to fold the fabric so that my fold is on this side, my selvage is on this side, and then I'm going to fold it again. Now I need to do that because I want it to fit underneath my stripology ruler, which I'm just going to grab here, because I want to cut. Now I'm actually going to turn the fabric around so that it makes sense, and I'm trying to keep all this in camera shot so you can see what I'm doing. So my stripology ruler, I'm going to place this on the fabric, making sure that the 2 folds are lined up straight on a line so that I can keep everything straight. I put my 0. So the stripology ruler, if you've not seen one of these, it's made by Creative Grids, and it has slits in here for me to cut through, and it will give me really accurate strips of fabric. Now I'm going to place my 0, which is where I'm going to do my first cut, just off to the side here, so that what I'm cutting off is going to be the selvage. I'm just going to move it over a little bit more, make sure I get all that selvage off. And I need to cut myself a 4.5 inch strip because I'm using a 4.5 inch triangle. Now, if you're using a different size triangle, you may need to use a different size strip, although you can always cut a 4.5 inch triangle even if you're using a larger triangle. Okay, so I'm going to cut the selvage off, and before I do any more cuts, I'm going to remove that selvage and just check that I have got all the selvage off and that I haven't. Need to do a little bit more. I'm just going to scoot over a little bit more just to make sure that I get the selvage on all of that fabric off. Okay, now I'm going to do a 4.5 inch strip. So without moving my ruler, I'm looking at the 4.5 inch size, and before I do that cut, I am just going to double check that I'm cutting the correct size. Yes, I am. 4.5. Okay, and cut that so I don't need those selvages. I'm just going to shift my stripology ruler out of the way, And now I have, oh no, we'll have to bring it back in a minute. So now I've got that little extra bit that I cut off to make sure that I had, and there is my strip. It's 4.5 inches wide. I'm just going to set that aside because now I want the rest of it, I want to turn it the other way. And I'm going to cut some 4.5 inch strips again. So I've turned my fabric, and yes, I do need to fold that up. So I'm actually going to open that out. So I've got my two layers here. I'm just going to open it out because I do need to fold it so that it fits under the stripology ruler. So I'm now folding it that way. And I'm going to cut some strips going the other way, which will give me stripes going the other way. Now I want to do several of these at 4.5 inch. So again, I line up my stripology ruler. I'm going to make sure that I'm cutting off the tiny little bit on this side of the 0, and then I'm going to do 4.5 and 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 13.5, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 18. So that will give me my strips. So 0, 4.5, and then add 4.5, which will give me 9. Add 4.5, which will give me 13.5. 1, 2, 3. Yep, just double checking. And then add another 4.5. 1, 2, 3, 4 will give me 18. Now what I would normally do if I was going to be doing a lot of these, I would grab myself a Sharpie marker and I would put a little mark at each of those 4 numbers, or the 5 numbers, 0, 4.5, 9, 13.5 and 18, so that I remember exactly which one I'm cutting. So that's all I'm going to cut for now. You would go ahead and cut the rest of that into, so that will give me, move that, 1, 2, 3, 4 strips, and then I would get another 4 strips from what I've got left here and a little bit left over. Okay, but that's enough to cut now to show you. So we have 1 strip with the stripe going along the strip, and the other ones, the stripe is going the other way. See that? So then we're going to use our template. Now here I've been using my 45mm cutter for the stripology ruler, but I'm actually going to change to a 28mm cutter. Now I have an Alpha and a Clover. I like to use a 28mm cutter when I am using a template because it makes it easier to cut. I find that a 45 can be a bit big and cumbersome when I'm cutting around templates. The other thing I like to do is put a bit of masking tape on the back. So I just simply make a loop of masking tape and put it on the back of my ruler, and that will help hold the ruler in place while I'm cutting. So I'm going to go ahead and do some of that cutting. Now I've left the 2 layers together as long as I keep them lined up nice and straight. I'm going to place this ruler as close as I can to the end here. Hold it in place. The masking tape will help hold it down. Open my cutter and do the cut on that side. Normally I would be walking around the table, or you could also do this on a rotating mat. I don't recommend cutting backwards towards yourself like that, but just make it quicker. There's our first one. And then turn the template around. So we cut here, and then we just turn the template around so that the tip, which is missing the tip, is now pointing towards me. Line it up again. So this should line up perfectly on your strip. The base of the triangle should be on one edge, and where the tip's cut off should be on the other. And try and line that side that's been cut up as accurately as you can with the template. And now every cut is going to be on my right hand side. Of course, if you're left-handed, you would start from the other end. And just keep turning the template around and placing it Just take a little bit of time to line it up so that it's accurate, and cut your wedges. Just going to move that over and cut the entire strip. Now you could stack your strips. I wouldn't recommend cutting through any more than 6 layers. However, whenever you stack fabric to cut, you do give the fabric the opportunity to be naughty and get out of control and move. So if you're not real sure or not real confident that you're going to be able to keep it under control, I do recommend that you only do the 2 layers at a time. It will take you longer, but your triangle pieces will be more accurate. However, if you're in a hurry and you're not very patient and you want to stack all your fabric to cut, go right ahead. But like I said, don't try and cut more than 6 layers. And if you were going to do that, I would probably stack your fabric before you cut your strips so that they are lined up properly. So you actually have 6 layers of strips right from the start, rather than trying to stack the strips on top of each other once you've cut them into strips. It's very hard to line things up accurately if you are lining one strip on top of the other. But when you just get yourself in a rhythm, it doesn't take very long to work your way down the strip. Now, oops, I'm not going to get another one out of that. No, see, I've run out of fabric. I haven't got enough, so that's a little bit of waste on that end. Okay, so we have all of these triangles, which I'm just going to push out of the way, and then we're going to cut some from this strip. Now, this strip has a fold, so I always start from the end that does not have the fold, and I do the fold last, and I'll show you why. So again, we line up. Everything should line up. The base of the triangle lines up with one side of the strip. Where the tip is cut off lines up with the other side, and I'm just going to do that naughty cut. And there's my first triangle. So do the same thing. Work your way down the strip, flipping your template around so that you alternate the base towards you and the tip towards you. And there's really very little waste. It's just that tiny bit at the end when you're doing this method. Now we're getting to the fold, and you can see here that I have run out of fabric. It's not quite enough. However, if I open that fold, I will get one more triangle off this strip because it's going over the fold. Now, if I had started at the fold end, then I would not be able to do that. So that's why I always start cutting from the end that doesn't have the fold, and when you get to the fold, you can sometimes get that bonus. Now, I know I'm not going to get another one because I've run out of fabric there, so I have a leftover piece there. All right, so now we have got 2 different types of triangles. Just going to put 1, 2, 3. Now, when I say 2 different types of triangles, when I open these out, you will see what I am talking about. So these are the ones that have the stripe pointing towards the center. And when you put them together as a hexagon, they're going to look like that. And the other set that came off the other strip has the stripe running parallel with the base of the triangle, and they will look different. So this is why we cut one strip parallel to the selvage to give us some triangles and therefore hexagons that look like this, and the rest of them we cut from the strips going the other way, and they are going to look like this. So you go ahead and you cut all of the fabric up like this. So I'm going to do a little bit more cutting, and then I'm going to come back and show you some of these, what they look like when we get a few different colours happening. Okay, so I've cut some more triangles with the other two fabrics, the light blue and the dark blue. So again, I have cut some that will have the stripe running parallel to the base of the triangle. So in the light blue, they are going to come together and look like this. And in the dark blue, just going to move that one over a little bit. The dark blue will be, let's sit this one next to it, down here. So you can see how they look. So these are the triangles that are running parallel. Oh, sorry, with the triangles that have the stripe running parallel. And I've got an orange one that looks like that as well. Let's bring in, just move that up a bit. Let's put the orange one in here. So that's all of the ones that have the stripe running parallel to the edge of the triangle. Just going to move them out of shot. Whoops, that's not wanting to move for me. And then the other ones, yep, this is the other one. This has the triangle, let's put it up there so it's still in the screen. This one has the stripe running towards the centre, so perpendicular to the base of the triangle. And then let me do that in the dark. Dark blue. Oops, that's not going to work. We need to go that way. Make my hexagon first. So you can see this stripe is running. It gives you a different look. I'm going to sit that one there. Actually, let's pull them back this way. And then the orange one, which is sitting up here, needs to go there like that. So that's the ones running the other way. So you will get, now I did sort of work it out, you get 4 sets of what I call the bullseye or the spider web, which is this one. You're going to get 4 sets in each colour of this one. And then you get about 13 sets of the other one. Now, if you want more like this, then you need to cut more strips that are parallel to the selvage at the start, because that will give you more like this. So strips cut parallel to the selvage will create spiderweb hexagons, and the strips cut the other way create these hexagons. Now, when you've got them all cut, you can play around with joining them up. You also may find that you end up with sets of 6 to make a hexagon, and you may find that you've got some leftover triangles. So you may want to play around with the idea of putting some together that have some stripes going parallel, some stripes going perpendicular. And you will get hexagons that look like this. So that you get 3 going parallel and 3 pointing into the centre. You could also change that up even more by changing the colour that you use. Let's do that. And you can play around with making multicoloured hexagons using 2 colours, or you could even go 3 colours. So let's do that. Hang on. Oops, no, I need a light one. Here's the light one. So that you have different look again. So they're all the ones that go in, but you can play around even more with that and use some that go the other way. So lots of fun can be had with designing your hexagons the way you want them to be. You can play around with that for as long as you want. changing them up, creating different looks. And of course you can also use the ones that go that way. Let me change that up and make it a spider web one by changing the direction of the stripe. And maybe you want to make them not symmetrical, or you could even do them like that. There are lots of ways that you can arrange your triangles into hexagons. Lots and lots of possibilities to play around with. And I'm not going to tell you what's right and what's wrong, because I just want to show you the technique and let you play with it, because that's the exciting part. Seeing what you can create once you know how to do the technique. Now, I've got triangles everywhere here, and they were all sorted into which way they were, but they are not now. Anyway, what happens next? Once you're happy with your design, so you need to lay it out either on a design wall or on the floor. Now, give you a tip. I don't have a design wall. I design on the floor, but I usually lay down a big sheet. Now, use a plain sheet, preferably a white or a cream one. Don't use a sheet that's got lots of patterns on it, or leaves, or anything that is going to be distracting from your design, because it does confuse your brain a little bit. So a nice plain white or cream coloured sheet, lay it down on the floor or on a bed, or use it as a design wall. Lay out all your pieces. Now, when you're laying them out, you do need to make sure that you have a center seam. So this is what I'm calling a center seam, and run all your center seams the same way on your design wall or your design layout. So I like to run mine vertically, so that when I've got that hexagon there, the next hexagon that I put next to it, I'm going to turn it so that it also has a vertical center seam. And then we have one that's going to fit in here, and it will also have a vertical center seam. So all of mine have a seam going vertically. Now I'm just going to set up a few of these hexagons here, because I want to show you what happens. So we're just designing, and I'm doing this a little bit randomly. I want to put that one, actually I want that one to be over here, so I'm just going to have to pick it up and shift it. Put that one over here. So once you're happy with your design, and I've got triangles everywhere, once you're happy with your design, you then need to start sewing the pieces together. And that one you can barely see. And then this guy we're going to put down here. But just make sure all your seams, all of your hexagons have a center seam, because when I do this, you'll see that the construction method, there is no setting seams when you create this. And this is what I mean by it being very similar to the quilt that I had hanging behind me. The construction method is the same. So what you need to do, once you get to you're happy with your design, take a photo of your design, make sure that you've got a record of it, just in case, you know, the cat comes in and plays with everything and it's no longer in the same place that you left it, because that happens sometimes. Or you've got children or grandchildren that may play around with it, or the wind, you know, you open the door and the wind goes woof, or you think it's hot today and turn your ceiling fan on and everything fluffs everywhere. Yes. So once you've designed it and you're happy with it, then we need to start the construction of it. So I would sew this together in rows. So if I separate these out into rows, you can see exactly what I am talking about. Separate the rows out. So here is one row, and you would sew all of these pieces together. Now, the way I like to do it is I grab my pins, and I'm going to start from this end because you can see what I'm doing here. And I'm going to flip this one over the top, line it up, and it should line up accurately. If you've cut them accurately, they should line up accurately. I've got the nubbed end, or the where the point was off here, and they lining up on each other. Now this is the seam I want to sew, so I'm going to put 2 pins in that. Make sure you pin the correct seam. Don't accidentally pin the wrong side. And you should always be having that cut off tip should be part of what you sew. If you find that you are sewing this side that has no cut off tip, you're sewing the wrong side. So that one is going to go there. Now it won't fold back now because I've got the pins in. And I need to sew that one before I pin the next one on. So I might do that now. I'm just going to do a 1/4 inch seam. Just turn my machine on here. And I'm just using a neutral coloured thread, so a grey. I'm using a grey thread, which I'm hoping will hide nicely in the piecing. And I'm going to sew that seam. Oops. And then I'll show you what happens next, because we need to press this. Hang on, let's go. I take my pins out as I go. Now normally I would have my pin cushion on the other side of my machine, so that when I take the pin out with my right hand, I am going to be, sticking it into my pin cushion. Now I'm also going to sew another one as well, just to get my other piece off. I always chain piece. I never take my pieces off the machine and have nothing there. Chain piecing means that I can save thread, don't have to hold my thread because the piece that's already there is holding the thread for me. And by sewing this second one, which comes off this row, I can then get my other piece off. And see what I mean about always having something on my machine? There it is. That was what was sitting on my machine before I started sewing today. So there's always something on my machine. So once I've got this off, I then need to press it. Now you can press it with an iron, or you can finger press it. Now I'm just going to finger press so that I don't have to set up an ironing station to show you what's going on. So when I finger press, I'm going to open it out. Now you can press the seams open, which is a good thing to do in this particular technique, or you can press to the side, which is what I like to do. With this hexagon technique, or this 60-degree triangle technique, it is recommended that you press them open. But you know what? I don't like seams pressed open because there is nothing in there, as in that you can't ditch stitch. So this is how you would, I'm going to show you how you press it open. You would do this. You'd open it up and you would press that open. And then all you've got in there is stitching, and so I don't particularly like that in quilt construction. So I'm actually going to press my seams to the side. I'm just going to work out which side I'm going to press. I'm going to press that way. So I'm pressing away from the next one I want to join on. So I simply finger press. So this is a little finger pressing tool, and I just press that nice and flat. Like I said, you can do this with an iron. You don't want to be distorting your fabric. And then I also turn it over and press from the front side as well. And if you press correctly with a finger presser, you should get that nice and flat and opened out fully. Now this goes back in here. Okay. And then my next one is going to go in place. So then I put this one, and you'll notice that the nubbed edge, or the cut off point, still lines up perfectly. And I'm going to pin that. I always pin just so things don't move, and the other reason I pin is then I know which side I'm supposed to be stitching, because I could accidentally stitch this side, but I wouldn't do that because there is no cut off point. Remember I said we're not stitching on the side that's got the cut off point. So I'm just going to pin this, stitch it, and show you that process again. Now you probably do need to be able to work with this laid out so that you know exactly which one is going to be next. Now I'm going to take off my other. So basically I'm working on 2 rows at a time. So I'm going to, which way am I pressing that one? So I'm pressing that towards, with the cut-off point there, I'm pressing it away from myself. So I'm going to press that seam down. Turn it over and give it another press from this side. Put it in back in place, and then I have this other, oops, that's out of screenshot. I have this other one to put on. So I'm going to line that one up. Pin it. Make sure it's lined up perfectly. Pin it. Stitch it. Take my pins out as I go. Take off my other one. So again, I want to press this away from, it goes in there, yep. Press this away from myself. Oops. So if you have done this technique before where you have sewn the hexagons together and you've pressed your seams open because you've been told that that's the better way to do it, you will notice that these seams pressed to the side still sit nice and flat. So you can certainly press them to the side. So there is my first one there. Now then I keep working up the row, and I've got another row happening over here, which only had 3 in it, by the way. But I just keep working up the row until I get that entire row done. I'm going to be working on 2 rows at a time, just so that I can chain piece. And by laying it back into position every time, make sure that it all lines up. So that's the technique of how to do that. So I'm going to do a few more of these, and then I'm going to come back and show you how to join the rows together. But I'm just going to, yep, I'll be back in a little while. Okay, I've done some sewing, and this is what I've discovered while I've been doing the sewing, and so I want to pass this on to you. I actually found that if I made them into the half hexagons first, it was easier. So, and I've also discovered with the pressing, if I always put the nubbed side or the corner cut off, if I always put that on my left side and pressed away from me on all of my pieces, I actually had the seams going in a spiral when I did that. So I always made sure that the cut off one was on the left, I pressed away from me, so that's when you get the first 2 triangles together. And then when you get the third one on, again, the nubbed off side or the cut off side is to the left, and I press away. So this one is already pressing away towards you. So by doing that, I'm getting all of my seams going in the same direction in a spiral. Now make sure when you're pressing that you get this seam fully open. See how it's a little bit of a, I don't know whether you can see that's a little bit of a tuck there. I want to make sure that that gets opened out, and I don't want any what I call tucks or fold overs. It's okay if you can just see your stitching there is okay. You definitely don't want anything folded over. And by doing that, when you've got the, so this is what I mean by sewing them into 2 halves. Don't sew that center seam though, because this, we need to be able to put them in rows. So I actually found that if you sew your triangles into to this stage where you've got 2 halves, they're also easier to design with rather than having all the individual triangles. Now I'm just going to flip these over to the back, and you can see what's happening here, that these seams are going that way and these seams are coming this way. So that seams are going in the opposite direction, because eventually when these get stitched together, and they'll be in rows by then, when this gets stitched together, the seams are going in the opposite direction to each other, and there won't be so much bulk. If you don't pay attention to which way you're pressing your seams and you end up with some seams pressed, let's say that's there and that's there, then you've got a lot of bulk when you put that together. So by making your seams go in a spiral all the same way, and the way I achieved that was always pressing away from me with the cut off bit on the left hand side. So I've done quite a bit of sewing, and I now have several of these hexagons, and they are all at the half hexagon stage. See how they're all at half hexagons? So this will allow me to now design with them. So instead of doing them all in rows, like I said originally, you can do it that way, but you may find it easier to actually create the half hexagons and then design. So now I can play around with how I want these to be. And I'm going to put, what have I got? So these are all the bullseye ones. And then the other three are the other three that I've got happening here are going the other way now. Maybe I want to mix that up a bit. I don't know. But let's say, because I want to show you how to join the rows together. So let's separate them back into their rows. Row, 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 row. Okay, and now how do you finish off the outside edge? I want to show you that too. So let's say this is going to be the outside edge. So I don't need this piece, but I can simply turn it around and pop it up there. I'll just pull this down a bit, you'll see what I'm talking about. So this and this are the two different halves, and this will give me a straight edge. Now the tops and bottom edges, there's two ways to deal with those. You can either cut them off after you've sewn the rows together, or you may find you've got some spares. So pop the spares in and then cut them off. So they're not actually a full hexagon, but you need to sew them onto the row before you sew the rows together if you're going to do it that way. Or if you want to put a border of a plain fabric around, then you need to cut the same width strip. You cut the triangles, same size, and you put those plain triangles on here and then cut off here. But you can get a straight edge on the side by splitting. See this? There's the half there. Don't need it out there, but fill in the gap there. And so I could do the same with the other side if I just pull this back in a bit. So this dark one here, oops, that's out of screenshot. He goes up there. He's the other half to this. And that gives me two straight edges. So let me move that over a little bit, and you can see now I've got two straight edges by moving those halves up there. So now to sew these together in rows, I'm going to do this center one. I now need to sew these two together, and I need to sew these two together, these together and these together, and then I'm going to sew the rows. So I'm just going to do that sewing and then come back and show you how to pin for the rows. So when you're sewing the half hexagons together in rows, we're now going to be sewing the triangles that don't have any cut off bits. If you line them up exactly as they appear they should line up, as in like that, okay, what will happen if you sew it like that is you'll end up with it like this. You'll have this bit of a dog-leggy thing. That's not going to work very well. So instead of lining that up, let's see another minute, where am I going? Instead of lining that up and going, oh, well, that's right, that's where those triangles line up, that is not right. You actually need to move that over. Okay, so just be aware of that, because I'm going to need to unpick this one because that is out too far, because I simply lined that up and it's not quite right. So just be aware of that. I'm going to unpick this and fix it, and then I'll be back. So if you have to unpick, be very careful because it is a bias edge. But hey, this is how I want it set up. I want to have a little dog ear at that end and a little dog ear at that end. And then sew it. And then it will line up properly. Okay, so once you've got them lined up properly, you will now have those little dog ears. You can just snip them off so that everything is in line. That's better, much better. Snip them off so that they all line up. Now, I would give this a press with the iron. If you've been using the finger presser on the way through, I would give it a press. Now, make sure you just press and that you don't move the iron around on your strip. Just keep it nice and flat and give it a good press so that everything is nice and flat. Once you've done that, then we're going to join them together. So you simply flip them over the top of each other, and at every intersection, I'm just going to turn it this way so you can see. Now what I'm going to do at every intersection is grab my pin, put it through the center of where that intersects, but I want to keep my seams where they need to be. So I'm going to look on the inside and make sure that comes through right at that point. And I'm also going to put it through the exact same point. Now I would probably do a few of these. So at every intersection. Oh, by the way, I pressed those seams that I just did. I looked at the two, forgot to tell you that. I look at the two strips upside down and I make sure that the seams that join one colour to the next, so the two half hexagons, go in one direction on one strip and the other direction on the other strip. So this one is going that way, this one is going that way. So both of these are going that way and both of these are going that way. That's why they're going the opposite direction and we'll have less bulk. So you need to look on the inside while you're doing this to make sure that you get right at that tip of where that triangle comes in and you push it through to the exact same spot on the other side. And these pins go straight through at this point. These are just the aligning pins, so we are lining it all up through that point, through that point. And I would probably do 3 or 4 of these because sometimes, you know, your quilt might be quite large and it's going to go through a lot of... Alright, so I've got 4 done there. Now I'm going to go back to the start. Now that is going straight through. Then I grab another pin and I put this one in at an angle. And then I remove that anchor pin. I can now use that in this point and I'm putting it in at an angle. In and out, and pulling out that. So this straight through pin, the one that's in there, is holding everything aligned how I want it, and this second pin I then push in at an angle, holding down my seams where they're supposed to be, and pull out that initial alignment pin. So the one that goes straight is an alignment pin. Now I'm also going to put a pin at the end and a pin at this end. And depending on how big my triangles are, I will possibly pin, and with these ones I probably would because these are all bias edges and they tend to be stretchy and move a bit. So I whack in a pin in the centre of each of these to keep everything lined up. And then I would sew this seam. So once I've got all of those pins in there, I'm going to sew this and then come back and show you what it looks like. Okay, so I've got that seam done. And if I hold this up, now it hasn't been pressed with the iron, I've just finger pressed it, but you can have a look at that, how that centre has come together, and each of these seams and points have come together quite nicely by using that pinning technique. So we then go ahead and do the same with these ones. Join the rows together, so join the half hexagons together to make rows. Now remember to offset, so that don't just line those triangles up because they won't be lined up. What you need to do is have them so that they are offset a little bit and you've got dog ears there so that your strips actually line up straight. So you sew the half hexes together and then you join them on. So that's basically how you do the stripes and wedges. And so we've used a 60-degree triangle or 60-degree wedge to create these. So I want you to have a go, choose yourself a stripe and have some fun. See what you can come up with. So thank you for joining me and enjoy the rest of the gigs. Bye for now.